these are the things to think about when you're deciding, hey, which of these episodes should I select? Should I do lower joints? Should we actually do some spine cases? And you're thinking about, what's your current dynamics? How many other participants are involved in BPCI? Your hospitals, a hospitalist group, maybe a primary care group and an ACO. What are those dynamics? Do you have your physicians supporting and engaged in this process? For example, if you're doing lower joints, maybe you got most of the guys involved, but your spine docs are like, hey, we don't even want to touch a bundle. So think about that support and engagement. The clinical processes and protocols that you already have in place, are they coordinated? Does each of the doctors have a totally different process each individualized? What does that look like? Are you doing case management? Do you have a preferred network of PAC providers? Are you managing across the continuum of care? If you've been in BPCI before, it's likely that you're doing a lot of these, you're focused in these areas right now. It's just, hey, can you take that from what you've been doing in the lower joints and actually apply that to potentially some of the other episodes? And then finally, what's your ability to actually impact the cost? And so do you have a low volume episode? Do you have a higher volume? Is there significant variability in the cost? Are there areas where you can effectively manage and impact? So, to get there and actually manage those potential savings, how do you succeed? How do you create those, $1,000 to $3,000 of savings per case? Obviously aligning with an experienced group, experienced convener, having an appropriate and comprehensive program, selecting the right episodes, being able to have information and data that comes back that's actionable and allows you to make decisions, a good performing network, and obviously the care management processes, tools, and support in order to execute an effective program. The areas that are the key performance indicators that you're looking at. So if anybody's looked at their opportunity analysis review in that workbook or in some of the earlier documents we gave, that PDF file, you're looking at things like readmissions, IRF, which is inpatient rehab facility, so acute care rehab. You're looking at skilled nursing, so SNF, looking at home health agency, and then finally at outpatient therapy. Your ability to affect each of these areas from a cost standpoint, whether or not the rate, so the number of patients going in there, or the length of stay that they're having in any one of those particular areas. And that really goes back to that purple box right there with discharge destination. So what is the discharge disposition of those patients that are leaving the hospital, and how are you able to impact that discharge disposition? So looking at the areas for you to be effective in this, why partner with us is, we have obviously an experienced team, heavily involved with CMS and able to engage and influence a lot of the decisions at CMS. Given one example of, the patient attribution that we have in this program, the Part B filter that is actually utilized to link the physician back to the actual patient and thus to the episode. So how do you know that a patient is being attributed to a hospital versus a physician group? That Part B filter methodology was essentially created by Jerry Rupp on our team and built in conjunction with our relationship with Dan Muldoon and Adam Conway over at CMS. So lots of experience, proven success, preferred partner. We have the ability to support a variety of solutions in the care management side, flexible, configurable options for you guys, and really looking to use BPCI and as a launching pad and build above and beyond that with our commercial bundle teams. The data doesn't lie. So when we look at the data, all the data you're looking at right now is data that's derived from CMS. So this is CMS data sets. All the cost, all the pricing, everything in there is Medicare paid claims, right? So what is not in a paid claim for Medicare is the implant cost, right? So there's no implant cost inside of the data that we're looking at. There's no supply cost inside the data we're looking at. Whether the patient stays 1 day or 10 days at the hospital makes no difference in the paid claims. The hospital is paid a set DRG rate. So in any of these paid claims areas, you have essentially a set payment, and so the set payments are DRGs, CPTs that are billed by the physicians, whether it's the surgeon or an anesthesiologist, and then other things like inpatient rehab, right? Inpatient rehab is a set amount. The other areas you have are per diem amounts, which per diem amount would be like a per day amount for skilled nursing, right? They'll establish a set rate with the patient, a rug rate. That rug rate, say, is $450 a day, and every day a patient stays there, the skilled nursing facility is billing $450 a day. Home health has a similar process. It's somewhat of a global payment that's tied to a per diem rate, right, or a per service rate. So if you have 6 to 10 visits, 6 visits or less with a home health agency, it's a set amount. 6 to 10 sets up a global payment, and that global payment changes with the more frequency of those visits. It's essentially it in a nutshell. But most important thing is it's paid claims from CMS. The episode attribution is determined by BPCI rules. So you're not selecting the patients. Those patients that are listed in your data are the ones that are listed because CMS went through the process of assigning those patients to your orthopedic group. And then all the calculations that we're using are essentially based on the BPCI rules, which is a combination of a variety of different documents to give us an indication of how are those claims aggregated, assigned to an episode, and then assigned to an orthopedic group. The claims data results indicate your past performance and more. It's showing, your post-acute care utilization previously. So these KPIs, these key performance indicators for SNF, home health, and such are all based on your prior history. And remember, the history that you're being judged on in BPCI Advanced, so starting October 1st, for that first 15 months, Q4 through Q4 of 18 through 2019, that period of time is being judged against the baseline of 2013, 14, 15, 16. So that's the baseline you're looking at that actually drives all of those costs on your past performance. If you're looking at this is some of the sample output data I know that you guys have seen and looked at before, and this is where we start thinking about what are these KPIs. In this example here, DRG 470, which is lower joint replacement, includes hips, knees, and hemis. All that's in that average cost of $17,115. If you look over on the far right where it says the anchor hospital, the weighted average, $19,180. That's the average cost that's at those hospitals. As you can see, these are the key performance indicators listed across here for those episodes. If you want an additional breakdown, you would look on your below there at the major joint replacement of the lower extremity, and you see DRG 469 and DRG 470. The distinguishing factor between those is 469 is all those patients with complications. They are acute complications that are occurred within the hospital, and then 470 is typically where most of your hemis and your primary electives are going to be in. Looking at the BPCI opportunity analysis that we've begun distributing, a couple of things I want to point out here is obviously we're showing you an overall savings. We're showing you the episode count for the 2016 baseline data we have. This baseline data for episode count and baseline data for the episode cost, that's based on data from the standard analytical files that we purchased using the BPCI Classic rules. We received all of the detailed data this past weekend, have been staging, parsing the data out, putting that data together, and hopefully we'll be in a position to start distributing that data soon. and going back into this document, this workbook, and repopulating these baselines with the actual data we received from CMS. But what this is showing you is those episode, it's showing you the opportunity between your historical episode cost and what your target price is. So that CMS target episode price that everybody's been looking at, that episode price is the weighted average from the hospitals that you've been at. So if you're at one hospital, you'll probably see that the weighted average cost compared to what your baseline is probably not too dissimilar. But that target price, for all intents and purposes, right now, that's pretty much your target price. There's some factors that could change that, some modifiers as far as case mix change, or in that case mix could be the case mix difference between which hospitals you're going to, or it could be a case mix difference of the type of patients that you're seeing. So, if you saw more trauma patients for Hemis, that's going to make an adjustment in 470. But what this begins to show you is obviously the potential savings that could be calculated for each one of these clinical episodes. I know one of the questions that has come up fairly frequently now, looking at these target prices, has been, oh, hey, spine looks really good, and then some of these other procedures like hip and femur procedures except major joint, or even lower extremity and humerus procedures except hip, foot, and femur are suddenly looking like potentially good episodes to be in. I'll get into that in a second, of like how we kind of think about these different clinical episodes and how we group and what are the questions you're really asking to determine whether or not you should do these episodes. Last thing I'll show you here on just some of the data stuff is we've got the 4-year data sample pretty much raring to go, and you will be getting more and more information over the coming weeks that will be showing you sort of the trends over your past 4 years. You'll be seeing, as you see here, you've got major hip and knee joint replacement, where you see non-hip fracture and hip fracture. We'll be giving you abilities to break out more and more of this detail to get a better understanding of what those costs are and what the opportunities are in each of the areas. And again, we're there for you the whole way. So if you need to look at, okay, I don't know what this is telling me, or how do I interpret it, we'll be there to help you do the interpretation and get a better understanding of what your opportunity is and ultimately what this data is telling you. So interpreting the data, really thinking about it, right? So the data, what do the numbers really mean, and what are the performance benchmarks? So really trying to understand, when you look at this data, are you already at the lowest cost, or are you at a cost that, or are you at a benchmark right now that you can see some marketable improvement in actually lowering those benchmarks? And you have to, each one of these discussions is individualized, right? So it's not a situation which you just throw some thresholds up and go, hey, everybody should be at 10% skilled nursing. Well, that's not necessarily realistic for some markets. Some markets, because of the patient mix or because of the geographic area that they cover, their skilled nursing utilization is 10% may be too high, 10% may be way too low, and you have to tailor these decisions based on what is actually going on in your particular market. So that means you have to, not really just make a decision based on just the numbers, but an interpretation of the numbers. So understand the context of the values is important. The utilization rate versus the length of service. And I'll give you a really good example is for any groups that have not been in BPCI, as you get into BPCI and you begin to manage the patients and you change the discharge disposition, what you're going to see is that your skilled nursing, let's say your skilled nursing rate is at 25%. If that goes down to 18%, 15%, and your length of service, your length of stay at the skilled nursing had started off at 21 days, so 25% of your patients are going to skill, they're staying there an average of 21 days. As you drop the number of patients going in the skill, say from 25% to 15%, you may see that 21-day length of stay the same or increase. So why would it actually increase? is that you're reducing the number of healthy patients going to skill, and now the patients that are actually going to skill are much sicker patients that really actually need to be there. So you need to understand that you're not always going to see utilization drop and length of service drop at the same time. So understanding how these two key performance indicators actually change. The other question about the data, looking at the data and understanding the context is, applying care redesign processes. How are those care redesign processes truly going to affect the patient? So an example I'd give you is when we do a deeper dive on a particular group, is what we'd look at is, okay, here's your patient population of 300 patients. Well, 100 of them should have gone home with just outpatient therapy. Another 100 of them should have gone home with home health services ranging from anywhere between 6 to 14 different visits, which are likely just therapy visits. And then the other 100 may have been a combination of needing certain skilled services. Those skilled services, instead of maybe being 21 days, a 21-day length of stay, might have just needed like 7 to 10 days, right? Or they may have needed 20 visits from home health. So what you want to do is do that distribution of your patients. What we would help you with is do a distribution of the patients and look at what was the appropriate setting for each of those patient categories, and did you fall into those particular buckets? And if you didn't fall in those buckets, what impact and what value does care redesign have on getting the patients to the right care and the right care setting at the right and appropriate time? Finally, what's more than numbers is the distribution of costs. So low cost versus the outliers, right? So, do you have a distribution curve that's a nice bell curve where a majority of the cases and the average cost is kind of right in the middle, and you're just essentially moving that bell curve over to the left? Or is it a circumstance where your cases are mostly low cost with a couple high outliers? A good example of that would be in previous experience in BPCI Classic, we had an organization that was in upper joint replacement. Well, uppers is pretty much just shoulders, but once in a while there's going to be an elbow or a wrist replacement. And so what ended up happening is that group did about 20 procedures. Average target price was, say, around $20,000, and most of their cost was coming in around 16. Looked really great, and then they suddenly had an elbow replacement, and that elbow replacement essentially put them at break even, and because it was a $90,000 episode, something like that. So we want to look at the distribution of cost and find out, hey, do you have a bunch of low costs with a couple of these huge outliers? And is it a circumstance that you're susceptible to any of those particular outliers? Next thing is obviously line care setting to their patient risk profile, which I briefly discussed. And then what's any of the variability inside of these episodes? So, how from looking from one quarter to the next, 1 year to the next, how much variability in these particular episodes do you see? Do you see these big, 5, 10, 20% swings from quarter to quarter between your average cost, and what is that actual variability, and is it something that could potentially even be managed? Another thing is volume impact, right? And so, and again, think about, these are the things that you're thinking about. Okay, I look at these episodes, I see that the target price looks really great. What are the things that I should be thinking about, right? So what I've just previously mentioned, then you start thinking about volume, right? So maybe you have 100 cases in a particular, you have 500 total joints you're able to do for lower, but what's going to be the impact on that volume? Are you going to get the full 500 of those? Is there a CJR impact? Do you have a next-gen ACO or a shared savings program that's in track 3? Are you suddenly going to lose attribution of those patients because of that, right? What's the impact of the attending and the operating precedence rules? So in some areas, I think you're going to see circumstances in which the hospital has their employed hospitalist putting their MPI on as many of the attending fields for the UB04 as possible to get as many episodes assigned to the hospitalist group, which is owned by the hospital, so they can capture those particular patients. So you think you have to think about what is that particular impact. Even the impact of you guys, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, hey, we'll have the hospitalist take all of the trauma cases and we'll just do all the electives, right? So we just want all of the primary total hips and knees, and every one of the hemis is going to be listed under the hospitalist, and they're good with that. Well, we want to look in and find out, do your elective procedures have an opportunity for you to really reduce the actual cost, or are they already at a low cost? Are they already some of the lowest cost, and thus you actually lose opportunity by not managing the trauma? I say that because in the past, working with some groups that have implemented a strong care management system, they've taken trauma cases that on average cost, $35,000, $37,000, $40,000 and reduced those costs to $25,000, $26,000, $27,000. Now those cases then actually became, some really financially, some really good episodes for them to actually be in. So it's not a simple decision of like, let's just get rid of the trauma, let's keep all the electives. So you want to think through it. And then finally, the outpatient of the impact of the outpatient TKAs. I have to say, I'm just like shocked at how all over the place this is. I mean, it's just the variability of the hospitals in which, one hospital literally in the same state, one hospital has 80% of their patients being listed as outpatient TKAs, and another hospital, one city over, within 2 to 3 hours has 0% going out. It is all over the place. I mean, I met with an organization recently that indicated that, they're listing these patients, when they list them as inpatient, as being inpatient total knees, they're actually having an outside review firm call them and ask them, well, we really think you should list them as outpatient TKAs. So you need to think about what's the impact of that. I know that Jerry has been working on language, both with CMS and a few other folks, to work on language to give the right documentation so that those patients that have been listed as outpatient TKAs can remain as inpatient. So everybody knows if you're doing a total joint and you're in BPCI advanced and you're doing a total joint, total knee replacement on a patient, if they get listed as an outpatient, they're not going to be in BPCI. So that patient is probably a low-cost patient in your bundle, which would be a really good patient to have. If they get listed as outpatient, they're going to fall out of that bundle. So obviously considerations, volume, what's your baseline cost, what's your target price look like, have you had previous care redesign efforts in the program? If you haven't, that's usually going to be pretty effective. If you have, is there potentially some new care redesign efforts that you may be able to have an impact on? What's your savings potential that you have? And then one of the other questions you're asking yourself is, what's your risk tolerance, right? Are you new to the program, and do you feel like, hey, we're not really sure how much risk we want to take on in this? We would like to start the program and see, get some success, feel comfortable after a year or two, and maybe take on more risk as we grow and evolve inside the program. And that may be the same circumstance in a variety of sort of the procedures. Looking at your benchmarks, are you benchmarked in a way where you're within the 90th percentile? I can say the ortho forum members that participate in BPCI, all the ones that did well were the ones that fell into the 90th percentile. So there's a history of success there, which is great for a lot of you folks. There's colleagues that have done this program and done it very, very well. So when you're thinking about, hey, here's where we're at now, we're new to BPCI, how do we fit into the overall program, and what should our expectation be? And I think you can use a pretty simple example of this, a simple benchmark of the 90th percentile. So target price margins is pretty simple. You have your target price plus your baseline equals your margin. So these are, I know this seems relatively simple, but it's, that target price is established by CMS. We'll have annual adjustments on the target price. It is a prospective target price. So you get that target price now, and besides some modifier adjustments and some other adjustments, that's relatively close to what it will be. We are getting more information on the target pricing and the adjustments. I know we're going to set up a special webinar just to cover updates on BPCI that we've received in the last few weeks, and we expect to receive in the upcoming 2 weeks. So we'll be covering that. One of those items is the actual target prices. So if you look at this and take into account, something like your target price versus your recent cost margin, your number of episodes, pretty simple. Baseline target equals margin equals your annual savings. This seems really simple, but the reason we're putting this in this context is you may be thinking about grouping episodes together, and this is probably more impactful in spine, where you maybe have 20 episodes that are cervical fusion, or 40 episodes cervical fusion, another 40 or 50 that are spine fusions non-cervical. And if you take them in conjunction together, it looks good overall. And if you take them as individual, there's enough variability that in one period of time, the spine fusion non-cervical does well and cervical does poorly, but collectively they do well overall. So this is kind of indicating, this idea of taking this, the viewpoint from a larger perspective across multiple episodes. Increase in performance through care redesign. I'll move through this fairly quickly. Is that, you think about what's the impact that care redesign can have. I think one of the guys on our team, Jason McCormick, who's at Campbell Clinic, had done, those guys start off, in the mid 30s to 40s on skilled nursing, and they've reduced that to less than 5% now. And so the question of working with an organization, like ourselves, that have people like Jason, and collaborating with one of your colleagues, like a Campbell Clinic and others, you get to see the impact that an organization like that can really have. So what is your potential ability to really drive down that cost and thus increase your overall performance margin? And then, these small changes can have dramatic effect. Small changes, one of the ways you can look at a small change that you can have a major impact is utilizing some of the beneficiary incentive waivers. So suddenly changing the discharge disposition of a patient that was going to go to skilled nursing at $450 a day for potentially 15 to 20 days, and we've worked with you to contract out with an assisted living at, say, maybe $100 a day for 5 to 10 days. Making those small adjustments suddenly creates a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 savings. Creating a process in which the patients, instead of going back to the hospital for a readmission, are calling the care manager, or potentially even coming to your urgent care clinic to get triaged there. Suddenly you get a savings of $15,000, $18,000, $20,000 on that one patient because they didn't go into the readmission. And some of these things are really small changes to the patient engagement process and the workflow process that can have a dramatic impact. Care redesign, obviously patient-centered, focus on managing these transitions, especially at discharge disposition. What we would say is we're making a lot of decisions on clinical episodes based on, okay, what's the cost? What's the data telling you? In our experience, if you're managing to the best care plan and the ideal care plan for the patient, you have much more of an impact on cost than managing directly to cost, right? So if you're managing to the to the prospect of how much is it costing me for each thing I do for my patient, it's going to be a lot more difficult to manage versus saying, hey, here's the appropriate settings for the patient, here's the appropriate support that the patient needs, and building the care plan based on the patient's needs. If you're driving the care of the patient first and foremost, cost and cost reductions will follow. And time again, we have seen that when we show this data. If you're new to BPCI, especially when you look at the detailed data in the coming weeks, you're going to see these big high cost outliers. When I looked, if I had Group A and Group B, and they decided to engage in BPCI, when they decided to make that engagement, Group A they said, hey, we're going to manage all of our average cost patients, and we're going to manage them just 10–20% lower, because we're going to manage them through the care planning and through the care redesign process. So patients that were maybe traditionally going to SNF, we're going to have the right resources to put them into their home and support them either through home health or through our care management process. So when they made that decision versus another group saying, hey, let's look at all these high cost outliers, and we need to worry about that, and we need to focus on the costs that are driving this program. When Group B did that, they really struggled, versus when Group A decided, let's just drive the program through the care redesign process, the cost will follow. I can tell you time and time again, those that really made the decision to develop a really strong care redesign process and drive the changes through care plans had the biggest types of impacts. Again, focusing your care redesign process back to impacting these key performance indicators, but you're not selecting, hey, we want our SNF rate to go from 25% to 15%, and you just whiteboard it out and you hope that it happens. What you want to do is have a care redesign focus that actually helps you change those number of patients going in the SNF. So if you look at the last thing on there, behavioral health needs, if you have patients that have depression or other psychosocial factors that are impacting their ability to care for themselves, what is another solution other than skilled nursing that provides a resource? A simple example would be a patient that, 67-year-old woman who's going to get a total hip replacement, and her 70-year-old husband who's never cooked for himself. Now his wife is going to be recovering. She can't actually do the cooking. So her husband says, let's just go to the skilled nursing, since I'll be able to join you every night for dinner, and you won't have to worry about making dinner, and I won't have to worry about eating, TV dinners. So, these things happen. It seems pretty small, but these are things that suddenly cost $8,000 to $12,000. And so instead of thinking of the $8,000 to $12,000, think of solving, hey, how do we get Meals on Wheels there to have an impact on that patient, and get them into their home with their husband, and they have the resources to support both of them through Meals on Wheels. Impacting obviously these are the things that impact the KPIs. So looking at, these small little changes, reducing readmissions, looking at those readmits that fall into that 10 and 10.7% percentage, 10.7%, how much of that is made up by potentially avoidable readmissions? One example would be, if you have a fair number of GI hemorrhages that are the reason for the readmission, maybe you get with the doctors and look at the anticoagulant protocols that they're using. If you're looking at the number of readmissions that come from Saturday and Sunday, right? So maybe it's a circumstance where the home health agency is using temps or PRNs on the weekend, and that PRN is really not maybe not as engaged as they need to be, and they go in to see the patient, take the fever, and go, hey, they got it's 99, it's 100, we got to just send them in, right? Rather than trying to address something in their home, they just send them back because it's easier. So looking at those avoidable readmissions and getting them, and then, hey, you get down to the 5%. Inpatient rehab utilization, what I would say in general for the past 5 years of working with orthopedic groups across the country, that should pretty much be 0%. You may have 1 to 2 patients over a year go to acute rehab, but it's something that should be should be extremely low. Inpatient rehab requires a physician order. So for a patient to actually get discharged into inpatient rehab, they're going to need an order from a potential physician. So when you're thinking about episode selection again, and you see a really high IRF rate, that might be a really great opportunity for you to get to look at that episode, especially if your physicians are actually driving that order set. And it's the same circumstance for all these other areas. So episode selection in orthopedics, it kind of boils down to three areas, right? Total joints, right? So you're looking at lower joints, hips and knees. Ankles are included. They're usually just, you know, a one or two that happen each, you know, per year. As a good FYI, if you have a total ankle replacement, that's almost always a bundle buster. So it's almost always going to be above your target price. But if you look at lower joints, it's also going to include the hemis. Upper joints, primarily shoulders, and then bilaterals. And that's really going to be the bilaterals, whether you're doing them or not, is kind of the makeup of your physicians and how they work with or think about, you know, whether they're going to stage those joints or whether they're going to do bilaterals. Another good piece of information, if you're staging joints, if your docs are thinking about staging the knees, they're going to need to do them in 2 episode periods, because if they do that if they, you know, say they do the left knee and then 45 days later do the right knee, well, the left knee is going to be thrown out of the bundle. That episode's thrown out. So if they want to stage it and align it with BPCI, they're going to want to align it after the 90-day episode. So they may want to do, for the care of the patient, bilaterals. Another piece of information, we've worked with a couple of home health agencies that actually can service and support patients who have bilateral patients in their home. So that is an actual option. They don't always have to go to acute rehab or go to SNF. Spine, when you look at spine, you obviously have the fusions, both the cervical and non-cervical, and then back and neck, laminectomies and discectomies, et cetera. The last one is trauma and fractures. And our initial take on that from the modifiers that have come out is that this may be an opportunity for some of the orthopedic groups, both on the spine and the trauma. What occurred in the spine cases in BPCI Classic, in the first model, was there was not a good adjuster for complexity, right? So suddenly there were multiple levels that happened in the fusion. There was not a good way for CMS to make that adjustment in the complexity of the patient. So the way CMS did that originally is they just said that it should be accounted for in the DRG. And we know that it's actually not accounted for. The modifiers that they've put in place essentially account now for BPCI Advanced. Those modifiers account for changes in complexity of the patients. An example would be if you're using bone stimulators suddenly, there's an adjuster in the modifier that will essentially account for those bone stimulators. And so you're not going to essentially get punished because you're using a new $4,000 or $5,000 treatment that is actually billed and paid for by CMS, that's now in your bundle and wasn't previously in your baseline. So we think these modifiers essentially are going to have an impact and open up some additional opportunities for clinical episode selection. These are the episodes these are the DRGs that are in each of these episodes. So when we're talking about, for example, major joint replacement of lower extremity, that's 469, 470. And so for each of these episodes, you know, cervical spinal fusion includes these 3 DRGs, 471, 472, 473. So there's all those DRGs combined together on a weighted average based on the mix for that clinical episode. So you're not selecting DRGs, you're selecting a clinical episode. As an FYI, we will be sending out this list along with a corresponding crosswalk for all the operating procedures for every one of these clinical episodes. So you'll have all of the detail on what actually goes into fractures for femur and hip and pelvis, what actually goes into lower extremity and humerus procedure except hip, foot, and femur. So the selection process is to an extent somewhat simple. As long as we have all the, as long as you have all the data and you know what you're looking at, it's not too much. We're going to take all of these factors into consideration I've covered today and look at, what's your target price margin? What's the variability of the episode cost? Is there high variability? Is there low variability? What's your clinical episode volume? If you're at a low episode volume with some variability, are you susceptible to one or two outliers? What's the potential? What's the clinical episode potential? I mean, how much do we feel like and do you feel like can be addressed in care redesign efforts, right? How much of that excess cost can be driven down by changes in care redesign? And then finally, what's your risk tolerance? And if you've been in BPCI before and you have a lot of these processes in place, you have a strong care redesign program, you've got buy-in and support and engagement from your physicians, you probably have a higher risk tolerance than those that are going into BPCI for the first time. So what's your risk tolerance? And it may be a little bit more in one area and a little bit less in spine or something. So the process we're going to go through over the coming weeks for the next 2 to 6 weeks as we prepare to submit our participant profile on August 1st is we'll be distributing you an episode crosswalk. Sue's team has been working on that. It's essentially links the DRG to the operating room procedures. It's the most recent version of this crosswalk. We are in the process of finalizing our analysis of the BPCI claims data, and we will be distributing information with that data over the coming weeks that will give you more and more detail on this information. It's a lot of data, and it can be, to an extent, overwhelming to get all that information, especially if you're new to this. There's going to be a lot of information you'll receive. Again, we'll be there every step of the way to help guide you and give you information and feedback on how to look at the data, interpret it, and how to make a really good decision. Determine your potential, what's the potential risk, and then what's the episode initiator, each orthopedic group, what's your risk tolerance? How much do you want to take on, how much do you don't? In our experience, groups initially going into the program the first time want the least amount of risk. But as they develop the competencies and capabilities and skill set to manage bundles more effectively, over the first 2 years, they're developing those skills. And year 3, you may have a much higher tolerance for risk because you know how you're managing that risk. And it, for the most part, it doesn't really feel like risk. So let's look at your risk tolerance and say that maybe it's high at the beginning, but we're happy to work with you and change our arrangement as time goes on as you assume more and more risk. 4, we're going to make a recommendation on clinical episodes. So we will say, hey, we think you should select these episodes. Or more likely, you may hear a circumstance that says, we think you should do lower joints and uppers, and we don't think you should add the spine episodes until 2020. What we think you should do is start managing them now. We'll track them through the next 15 to 18 months. And if we feel like we're managing them effectively, cost is being contained, and we're seeing a positive result, and we're tracking a positive result, then what we'll do is say, let's add those spine episodes for 2020. That may be the same circumstance with some of the trauma episodes also. So we'll make a recommendation to you. You guys will look that over. You'll select the clinical episodes that you want to participate in. It's a very collaborative process that we kind of work on. How much risk do we take? How much do you take? How much, which episodes make sense within that risk profile? And then finally, we select the clinical episodes for participation, and we submit them onto the participant profile, which is due August 1st. As FYI, I will be shooting out an email to everybody probably later today. I know a number of groups have already selected to go with Fusion5 as their convener, and we're essentially pre-populating our participant profile right now. So we've started that process. We might make sure if you've selected us, we want to make sure we've got you already listed with all the information. And all we got to do is select the episodes and have everything else done before that. So if you've only selected us, just shoot me an email, let me know, but I'll be sending out an email to gather that information. Next steps, you know, obviously we've got the upcoming webinars, you know, really covering a lot of our technology coming up, I believe. We may supplant that with some information based on the updates for the BPCI program, because we've gotten a bunch of updates in the past few days and past few weeks. So those updates, we have our conference coming up in 27th, 28th, 29th. If you are attending, fantastic. You will learn an immense amount about BPCI. And if you've been in it, you're going to learn a lot, because we have some of the top performing groups all providing information. It'll be a really good session. If you're not attending, we still have some space available, so it'd be I think it would really be worthwhile. I can't recommend enough the experience and knowledge you'll get out of that. So it's kind of what we have next. We'll be sending out we'll be updating our opportunity analysis over the coming weeks with additional data, more data coming out, looking at episode selection in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then CMS documentation for the participation agreement we expect at the end of this month. So there'll be a lot happening over the next 4 to 6 weeks. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. We've recorded this, and so I know we'll have it available for everybody. But any questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@fusion5.us, or any of the emails that you guys have available. Again, looking forward to working with everybody, and thank you very much.